Every image is within certain images and without others, but of the aggregate of images we cannot say that it is within us or without us, since interiority and exteriority are only relations among images. To ask whether the universe exists only in our thought, or outside of our thought, is to put the problem in terms that are insoluble, even if we suppose them to be intelligible. It is to condemn ourselves to a barren discussion in which the terms thought, being, universe will always be taken on either hand in entirely different senses. To settle the matter, we must first find a common ground on which combatants may meet. And since on both sides it is agreed that we can only grasp things in the form of images, we must state the problem in terms of images, and of images alone. Now, no philosophical doctrine denies that the same images can enter at the same time into two distinct systems, one belonging to science, wherein each image, related only to itself, possesses an absolute value, and the other, the world of consciousness, wherein all the images depend on a central image, our body, the variations of which they follow. The question raised between realism and idealism then becomes quite clear. What are the relations which these two systems of images maintain with each other? And it is easy to see that subjective idealism consists in deriving the first system from the second, materialistic realism in deriving the second from the first. The realist starts, in fact, from the universe, that is to say, from an aggregate of images governed as to their mutual relations by fixed laws, in which effects are in strict proportion to their causes, and of which the character is an absence of center, all the images unfolding on one and the same plane indefinitely prolonged, but he is at once bound to recognize that, besides this system, there are perceptions, that is to say, systems in which these same images seem to depend on a single one among them, around which they range themselves on different planes, so as to be wholly transformed by the slightest modification of this central image. Now, this perception is just what the idealist starts from. In the system of images which he adopts, there is a privileged image, his body, by which the other images are conditioned. But as soon as he attempts to connect the present with the past to foretell the future, he is obliged to abandon this central position, to replace all the images on the same plane, to suppose that they no longer vary for him, but for themselves, and to treat them as though they made part of a system in which every change gives the exact measure of its cause. On this condition alone, a science of the universe becomes possible. And since this science exists, since it succeeds in foreseeing the future, its fundamental hypothesis cannot be arbitrary. The first system alone is given to present experience, but we believe in the second, if only because we affirm the continuity of the past, present, and future. Thus, in idealism, as in realism, we posit one of the two systems and seek to deduce the other from it. But in this deduction, neither realism nor idealism can succeed, because neither of the two systems of images is implied in the other, and each of them is sufficient to itself. If you posit the system of images which has no center, and in which each element possesses its absolute dimensions of value, I see no reason why to this system should accrue a second, in which each image has an undetermined value, subject to all the vicissitudes of a central image. You must then, to engender perception, conjure up some deus ex machina, such as the materialistic hypothesis of the epiphenomenal consciousness, whereby you choose, among all the images that vary absolutely, and that you posited to begin with, the one which we term our brain, conferring on the internal states of this image the singular and inexplicable privilege of adding to itself a reproduction, this time relative and variable, of all the others. It is true that you afterwards pretend to attach no importance to this representation, to see in it a mere phosphorescence which the cerebral vibrations leave behind them, as if the cerebral matter and cerebral vibrations, set in the images which compose its representation, could be of another nature than they. All realism is thus bound to make perception an accident, and consequently a mystery. But inversely, if you posit a system of unstable images disposed about a privileged center, and profoundly modified by trifling displacements of the center, you begin by excluding the order of nature, that order which is indifferent to the point at which we take our stand, and to the particular end from which we begin. You will have to bring back this order by conjuring up in your turn a deus ex machina. I mean that you will have to assume by an arbitrary hypothesis some sort of pre-established harmony between things and mind, or at least, to use Kant's terms, between sense and understanding. It is science now that will become an accident, and its success a mystery. You cannot then deduce the first system of images from the second, nor the second from the first. And these two antagonistic doctrines, realism and idealism, as soon as they decide to enter the same lists, hurl themselves from opposite directions against the same obstacle.